Hey guys, it's Casera, and today we're going to be doing part 1 of my audiobook guide for beginners, what I look for when choosing an audiobook. So I read my first audiobook in the fall of 2017, but I didn't consistently start reading audiobooks until June 2018. I have since finished 90 plus audiobooks, and I absolutely love them. I think that everybody should read audiobooks, and I have a little bit of experience with them now, so I thought I would help some of you guys out who don't have that much experience with them. I'm splitting this guide up into 3 parts. So part 1, which is this video, will be looking at what you actually should be looking for when choosing an audiobook. Part 2, I'll be talking about where I get my audiobooks and why I get them in those places. And in part 3, I'll be recommending you some audiobooks that I've read and absolutely loved. Before we get started, I wanted to mention, if you're choosing an audiobook for the first time, I highly recommend picking up something that you would normally read. There's tons of audiobook advice out there. There are definitely genres of books that work better as audiobooks than physical books, but if you don't read in those genres normally, there's a good chance that you may not like them if this is your first audiobook, and you may not like audiobooks in general. So I would say pick something that you would normally pick up and that you would like reading. That way you can kind of see if audiobooks are right for you before you dive into reading outside of your comfort zone. The first thing that I look for in audiobooks is to check if the audiobook is unabridged. So there are dramatized audiobooks, there are unabridged selections, and then there are just unabridged audiobooks. Dramatized audiobooks are not the actual book, but they're an adaptation of the book, the same way a movie or TV show is an adaptation of that book. I generally don't listen to dramatized audiobooks. I will occasionally if it's like a play or something like that, but even then I try to have the actual physical copy or an ebook version of that audiobook on hand so that I can kind of follow along with it and see all the stage directions and different things like that. For dramatized media, I think that watching the TV show or the movie is just more helpful than listening to the audiobook. So for example, Lord of the Rings is often dramatized as an audiobook, but at the same time there is a movie that you can watch instead that is probably going to be better because it has visualizations that'll help you really get into the story rather than just the audio. And another one with Lord of the Rings I've noticed specifically, they also have versions that are unabridged selections, which means they pick out chapters of the book and narrate those chapters in the audiobook, but there are chunks of the book that are left out. Again, not interested in selections of the audiobook. You want to listen to the entire audiobook. Personally, the first audiobook I picked up was Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. So this was a very good selection for me. I love long books that transport you to another world. I like books that you can just live in and escape to for a little while. I also really enjoy romance in my books, and I enjoy magical aspects of my books as well. So Outlander, which is like time traveling back to the Scottish Highlands, and there's a large romance aspect of that book, was just perfect for me. And Diana Gabaldon's writing style and Davina Porter, the narrators, her narration of the audiobook was just perfectly done on audio. So for me, this was a fantastic audiobook, but I realized this would not work for everyone. First of all, not everyone would want to start with a 30-hour audiobook. Additionally, some people don't like romance, so you have to take these things into account when choosing audiobooks. So I mentioned about 3 different aspects of that audiobook that I really liked. So we're going to talk about those aspects. First is length, second is narration, third is writing style, fourth, we're going to talk a little bit about genre. So let's start with length. Before you choose an audiobook, you want to look at the length of that audiobook. A 30-hour audiobook is very long. It's a lot longer than you're expecting when going into a book. So for example, we're going to look at Game of Thrones. So Game of Thrones is a great example because it has book form, it has a TV show, and it has the audiobooks. So the audiobook for A Game of Thrones is 30 hours. The first season of the TV show is based on the first book, and it is 12 one-hour episodes. So the audiobook is technically more than twice as long as the first season of the TV show. So it's gonna take you more than twice the amount of time to listen to that audiobook as it would watching the TV show. So those are things to take in consideration, because I know a lot of people consider Game of Thrones to be a very long TV show, but if you look look at it in audiobook terms, it's actually relatively short. That being said, you can listen to audiobooks at different speeds, but I don't recommend going over 1.5 speeds because after that, it's very hard to process all of the information that you're getting. And I'm an auditory learner, which means I more efficiently process information that is coming from sound rather than from visuals. And with audiobooks, you don't have visuals. So if you're not an auditory learner, it'll be really hard to process audiobooks at those faster speeds. So length is definitely a consideration you have to look into. When thinking about length, I wouldn't look at how you normally like to read books because books, you have to kind of stop and focus on those books. Audiobooks, you can kind of do it a little bit while you're doing other things like driving or walking or running. So think about your habits when watching TV or movies. Do you prefer to go to a movie or watch a TV show like one episode per week or one episode per day? Or do you occasionally just go on Netflix and binge watch an entire season of a TV show in one day? If you like to binge watch, like I do, then you can probably go for longer audiobooks because you'll enjoy just staying in that world for a long time. If you don't like to binge watch, then I recommend starting with shorter audiobooks like novellas and working your way up to those longer ones. So the next thing we have to talk about is narration. So there are two types of narration in audiobooks. There is single narrator and then there is full cast narration. First, I'm going to talk about single narrator. With single narrator, sometimes you have the author narrating their own book, and sometimes you have a professional voice actor narrating the audiobook. So really quickly, when the author narrates an audiobook, it can be really amazing. The author knows the voice of that novel better than anyone else. They can give you the right pacing that they meant for you to listen to when they're narrating the audiobook. That being said, not all books are well suited to an author narration. For example, if the main character of the book is a completely different gender or age than the author is, then the author's narration might not work out very well for that book. Also, we have to understand that authors are not professional voice actors. They won't necessarily have the same emotions and voice inflections as a professional voice actor would have. That being said, there are some author-narrated books that are fantastic. Specifically, comedian memoirs are really, really well done. And part of that is because comedians are known for stand-up comedy, so they're known for keeping people's attention with just their voices. So their audiobooks are really, really good. So with author narration, it can be hit or miss, but if it's a good author narration, it might be one of the best audiobooks that you read. Then there is also full cast narration. Personally, I do not like full cast narration. So basically in full cast narration, there is a different narrator for every character in the book, or at least a different narrator for every point of view in the book. I don't like full cast narration because the book is generally in one voice, but each narrator has his own voice. So it can come out as disjointed and a lot of times take you out of the story. There are some cases in which full cast narration would be good though. So I read The Help this year, which was full cast narration, and I thought it was really well done. I think part of the reason why is because all the narrators had Southern accents, so they had something to tie them together, even though each of the characters did have their own voice. And then there are other books that I wish had full cast narrations, like A Song of Ice and Fire. There is one narrator for the entire series, and that narrator does a really good job for characters like Ned Stark and Tywin Lannister, but not such a good job for characters like Sansa and Daenerys. So definitely consider the book that you're reading and how it's written. If it's written with one voice throughout the entire book, then you're going to want to go with a single narration, but if there are multiple varied voices throughout the book, then it would be a good idea to try and find a full cast narration. Usually audiobooks only have one or the other though. Occasionally you will get audiobooks that have both versions of it, especially like in classics and things like that. They will have like full cast narration of say Jane Austen books and single narrator versions of that as well. The next thing I want to talk about is writing style. Writing style is huge for audiobooks. Eloquent and atmospheric writing style can create the most beautiful audiobooks. But audiobooks also painfully highlight weaker writing styles. When you read a physical book, your eyes can glaze over the awkward and disjointed phrases that a less experienced author might choose when writing their book, but in an audiobook, it is painfully obvious. That's why I kind of hesitate from reading audiobooks by authors that I have never heard of because I don't know what their writing style is going to be like. So I would pick up their physical books first, decide if I like their writing style before I read their audiobooks. The last thing I want to talk about is genre. So obviously you want to pick genres that you read in normally. I personally read very wide ranges of genres, and some of my favorite genres are not ones that I would recommend reading in audiobooks. For example, high fantasy is one of my favorite genres, but I don't like reading high fantasy on audio. But there are definitely certain genres that work better on audio than others. The first one I want to talk about is nonfiction. Nonfiction is amazing on audiobook. I probably wouldn't read nonfiction at all if it wasn't for audiobooks. I don't particularly like reading nonfiction in physical form, but as an audiobook, I just love the information, and a lot of times the nonfiction audiobooks are read by the authors also, especially if it's like memoirs or something like that, especially those comedian memoirs. Very well done. But other like historical nonfiction, scientific nonfiction, self-help books are all really great on audio. Another genre that I think works particularly well on audio are mysteries and thrillers. I don't read a whole lot of mysteries and thrillers outside of audio as well, but every time I read one on audio, I'm always very dedicated and in the book while I'm reading it. I would also maybe put horror in that category. I personally am not a fan of horror. I just don't find it to be scary, and that's kind of the whole point of horror. I like horror movies, but as books and audiobooks, it just doesn't work for me. But if you like horror, I think that would also be a really great option as audiobooks. And for the last genre that is just really great on audiobooks is magical realism or very atmospheric fantasy books. So when books that are just very well written with like magical aspects to it, but maybe not like a high fantasy book or something like that, those are just such great audiobooks to dive into and just be surrounded by. They're not necessarily books that I like all the time physically, but they're definitely books that I love on audio. So to sum it all up, when you're looking for the audiobook, definitely look for unabridged audiobooks because they are actually the book in audio form. Also, you want to look at the length of the audiobook and see if it's a length that you would actually read, and you want to consider the narration style and the author's writing style before picking up that audiobook. And genres that work really well on audiobooks are nonfiction, mysteries, thrillers, horrors, and atmospheric fantasy or magical realism. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful. Parts 2 and 3 of this guide are coming soon. Once they come out, I'll put the links in the description down below. I post videos every Monday, Tuesday, Friday, and Saturday, so consider subscribing. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up to support my channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!